On Christmas Eve in the United States, many things happen very quietly. Long before the sun sets, before the first light strands begin to glow along suburban rooftops, before the final errands are finished, the country begins to slow down. It does not stop completely. It simply eases into a gentler rhythm, like a clock that has decided to tick a little softer than usual. In small towns and large cities alike, Christmas Eve has always carried a certain calm that history books rarely mention. It is not the day of grand speeches or decisive moments. It is the day between things, between work and rest, between preparation and celebration, between what has already happened and what people quietly hope will come next. In the early years of the United States, Christmas Eve was not especially remarkable. Shops closed early, if they closed at all. Candles were lit because darkness arrived early in winter, not because they were symbolic. Families gathered simply because travel was difficult and staying home was easier. Hope, at that time, was not announced. It was assumed, modestly, and kept to oneself. As decades passed, Christmas Eve slowly became a pause in the American calendar, not an official holiday for much of history, but an emotional one. Offices emptied out earlier than usual, factories shut down machines a few hours ahead of schedule, trains ran with fewer passengers, and stations felt quieter than normal, even when they were full. People went home, or they went somewhere that felt close enough to home. By the mid-20th century, Christmas Eve had developed a very specific atmosphere across the United States. Radios played the same songs year after year, nothing surprising, nothing urgent. The repetition itself became comforting. Snow did not need to fall for people to imagine it had. Cold air alone was enough. Hope, on these evenings, did not arrive loudly. It arrived in ordinary ways. A kitchen light left on a little longer than necessary, a chair pulled out for someone who had not yet arrived, a window checked twice just to see if the weather had changed. These small actions appeared again and again, year after year, across millions of households. History rarely records such things because they do not change the direction of a nation, they only steady it. During difficult times, economic downturns, wars, uncertain winters, Christmas Eve often became quieter, not louder. People spoke less, they listened more, they waited, and waiting itself became a form of hope, slow and unremarkable. In many American homes, Christmas Eve traditions were intentionally uneventful. Simple meals, familiar conversations, predictable routines. The same chair creaking when someone leaned back, the same floorboard making a soft sound near the hallway. These details mattered because they stayed the same when so much else changed. Hope, in this context, was not excitement, it was endurance. It was the belief that tomorrow would come and that it would be manageable. By the late evening hours, neighborhoods settled into a deep stillness. Traffic thinned, televisions glowed dimly in living rooms, porches held packages that would not be opened yet. Outside, streetlights hummed quietly, illuminating empty sidewalks and parked cars dusted with cold air. This is the hour Christmas Eve is rarely remembered for, the late hour. Not the singing, not the gatherings, but the quiet afterward. People sat with their thoughts. Some reflected on the year that was ending, others avoided thinking at all. Both were acceptable. Christmas Eve allowed for that. It did not demand resolution, it only offered rest. Throughout American history, Christmas Eve has often been the night when people allowed themselves to believe, just briefly, that things might improve, not dramatically, not instantly, just enough. Enough to sleep. Hope on Christmas Eve did not promise success, it promised continuation. Another morning, another meal, another chance to repeat familiar routines with slightly lighter hearts. In rural areas, the silence was deeper. In cities, it was simply spread thinner, but everywhere the pace slowed, even time seemed less insistent. Clocks ticked, heaters clicked on and off, wind brushed against windows. These sounds formed a kind of lullaby that required no attention. And so Christmas Eve passed year after year across the United States, not as a turning point, but as a resting place, a moment where the nation collectively exhaled. Nothing remarkable happened, and that was the comfort. Because sometimes hope does not arrive with fireworks or declarations. Sometimes hope arrives quietly, sits down, and waits with you until you fall asleep. And on Christmas Eve, that has always been enough. As the night moved deeper, Christmas Eve in the United States became less about tradition and more about stillness. Houses that had been active only hours earlier settled into a soft hum of electricity and heat. Lights were turned off room by room, not all at once, as if the day itself needed time to rest. In older neighborhoods, the architecture held the cold differently. Wood-framed houses creaked gently as temperatures dropped. Brick buildings retained warmth a little longer. These details were unnoticed by most, yet they repeated every winter, every Christmas Eve, without interruption. History continued, quietly, inside walls and beneath roofs. For many Americans, this night was not joyful in an obvious way. It was reflective. The calendar turning toward another year encouraged slow thoughts. People thought about jobs that had remained steady and jobs that had not. They thought about family members who lived nearby and those who did not. None of these thoughts needed conclusions. Christmas Eve allowed them to exist without resolution. Across the country, hospital corridors dimmed their lights. Nurses walked with practiced calm. Emergency rooms remained open, but even they felt the influence of the night. Conversations softened, movements slowed. Care continued, steady and routine, which in itself became a quiet form of hope. In small-town America, local streets emptied earlier than usual. The last car passed, then another, and then none. Storefronts stood dark behind glass, decorations unmoving. Holiday signs that had once demanded attention now simply existed, waiting to be seen again tomorrow. In apartments and houses, people prepared for sleep, not in a hurry. Pajamas folded neatly, alarm clocks checked and left unchanged. Tomorrow, after all, would arrive whether planned for or not. Hope, on this night, did not insist on belief. It tolerated doubt. It sat beside uncertainty without trying to fix it. This is what made it gentle. Historically, Americans have often associated hope with action, building, expanding, deciding. Christmas Eve offered a different version, one that required no effort at all, one that existed simply by continuing to breathe, to rest, to remain. As midnight approached, many people were already asleep. Others remained awake without urgency. Radios played softly in kitchens. Television stayed on with low volume, more for company than content. The same movies repeated year after year, familiar enough to be ignored. Outside, weather moved slowly. Snow fell where it fell, rain fell where it fell. In many places, nothing fell at all. The sky remained unchanged, and that was acceptable. Christmas Eve did not need to perform. In the quiet hours, history paused its storytelling voice and became something else, background noise, a steady presence reminding people that they were part of a long, unremarkable sequence of nights just like this one. Millions of Christmas Eves had passed before. Millions would follow, each one carrying the same unspoken understanding. Tonight is not for fixing everything. Tonight is for rest. Hope rested too. It did not promise improvement by morning, it only promised that morning would come. And so the night continued, calmly, predictably, gently, until sleep arrived for most, and for those who stayed awake a little longer, until the quiet felt complete. The night moved forward without asking for attention. In homes across the United States, the last remaining lights were dimmed even further. Lamps were switched off carefully, not because it mattered, but because routine felt comforting. Hallways grew darker, living rooms settled into shapes defined only by moonlight and the faint glow of streetlights outside. Christmas Eve did not hurry anyone along. It allowed people to linger between wakefulness and sleep, that soft middle space where thoughts slow and memories blur gently into one another. In many houses, the air smelled faintly of ordinary things: clean fabric, old wood, warm dust near heating vents. These were not festive scents, but they were familiar. Familiarity on this night was enough. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed through a town without stopping. Its sound faded slowly, stretching out across the cold air. The schedule continued as it always had. Even on Christmas Eve, transportation moved quietly forward, reminding no one in particular that continuity was still happening. In the long story of American nights, this one blended in easily. No page needed to be marked, no footnote required. It existed simply because it always had. People slept. They slept in spare bedrooms and on couches. They slept earlier than planned or later than expected. They slept with doors open and doors closed. Each version was acceptable. Christmas Eve had no rules about rest. Outside, neighborhoods appeared frozen in time. Lawns were pale, trees stood still, decorations glowed softly, not competing with one another, just existing. Even blinking lights slowed perception, making time feel less urgent. Hope remained present, but unnoticed. It did not announce itself in thoughts or plans. It rested quietly beneath everything else, like a steady foundation that did not require inspection. People did not think, "I feel hopeful now." They simply felt less heavy. Across different generations, this same sensation repeated. Parents who once lay awake as children now slept in familiar silence. Children who did not yet understand the calendar sensed only that the night was gentler than others. In older American homes, floorboards shifted softly as temperatures changed. In newer ones, heating systems clicked on and off with quiet regularity. These sounds were predictable. Predictability itself became soothing. As the hours passed, even the idea of tomorrow became faint. Christmas Day waited patiently, not demanding anticipation. It would arrive in its own time. Christmas Eve did not require celebration. It offered permission. Permission to stop thinking about what had not been accomplished. Permission to pause plans that were unfinished. Permission to believe, just briefly, that rest was productive enough. History often records moments of urgency and motion. This night was the opposite. It was defined by its lack of demand. And so, across the country, under different skies and within different walls, Christmas Eve continued exactly as it always had: quiet, unremarkable, steady. Hope stayed with it, not shining, not fading, just present. And the night went on. The hours after midnight were the quietest of all. By then, Christmas Eve had almost finished being itself, though no one marked the moment. The date changed on calendars without ceremony. Digital clocks advanced by a single minute. Nothing else shifted. The night remained calm, unbothered by labels. Across the United States, the landscape rested. Highways carried only the occasional truck, moving steadily, lights stretching briefly across empty pavement before disappearing again. Small towns slept entirely. Large cities breathed slowly, their usual noise softened into a distant hum. Inside homes, sleep deepened. Dreams came and went without urgency. Some were clear, some forgotten instantly. They did not matter. Rest itself was the purpose. In kitchens, counters were clean or slightly cluttered. Dishes waited patiently in sinks or dishwashers. Nothing needed immediate attention. Morning would handle it. Hope, at this hour, became almost indistinguishable from comfort. It did not suggest change, it simply suggested that things were stable enough to let go for a while. In American history, stability has often been underestimated. It rarely makes headlines. Yet nights like this depended on it. The quiet success of ordinary systems, electricity, heat, locked doors, familiar routines, made rest possible. Christmas Eve, in this sense, was not symbolic, it was practical. The night allowed people to exist without expectation. No one needed to improve, no one needed to decide anything. Even worries were softened by the understanding that this was not the moment for solutions. In some homes, someone turned over in bed, a blanket was adjusted, a pillow was moved slightly. These small movements repeated in countless places, unnoticed, unrecorded, yet shared. Outside, the air remained still. If snow fell, it did so lightly. If it did not, the ground remained unchanged. Weather made no statement. Time continued, but gently. This was the hidden part of Christmas Eve, the stretch that belonged entirely to rest, the hours that no one talked about later, the part of the story that existed only to be lived through quietly. Hope stayed present by doing nothing at all, and the night, unremarkable and complete, carried everyone forward until morning came on its own. Morning did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, almost carefully, as if aware of the quiet it was replacing. The sky lightened by small degrees. Darkness loosened its hold on rooftops and sidewalks. Christmas Eve had fully passed, but it left behind a softness that did not disappear immediately. In many American homes, people remained asleep even as morning approached. Curtains stayed closed, alarm clocks were ignored, the day waited. When someone did wake, it was often without urgency, a stretch, a pause, the simple awareness of being warm and still. Thoughts arrived gradually, not demanding attention. Outside, streets were unchanged from the night before, decorations remained in place, lawns looked the same, the world had not transformed overnight, and that felt reassuring. Hope, now moving gently into Christmas morning, remained quiet. It did not announce itself as joy or excitement, it existed as steadiness, the sense that the day could be handled slowly, one moment at a time. Across the country, history continued in its most ordinary form. Coffee makers clicked on, heaters adjusted, someone opened a window slightly, someone else closed one. These small actions connected the present to countless mornings before it. Christmas Eve did its work simply by being calm. It did not solve problems, it did not promise outcomes, it offered rest, and that was enough. As the day unfolded, the memory of the night faded quickly, as restful nights often do. Few people would later describe it in detail. Fewer still would remember specific moments, yet its influence remained, subtle and lasting. In the long, quiet story of American life, Christmas Eve remained what it had always been, a pause that asked for nothing, gave a little comfort, and passed without announcement. The day continued without needing direction. Christmas morning in the United States did not rush forward. It unfolded gradually, carrying with it the same calm that had settled in during the night. Windows let in pale winter light. Rooms looked familiar in that light, unchanged, steady, dependable. Many people stayed in bed longer than usual. There was no reason to hurry. Schedules were loose or entirely forgotten. The clock still moved, but no one was watching it closely. In kitchens, simple routines resumed. A kettle filled with water, a mug placed on the counter, a spoon stirred slowly. These were not ceremonial actions, they were ordinary, and because they were ordinary, they felt grounding. Hope remained present in this ordinariness. It did not depend on gifts or plans or gatherings. It lived in the assumption that the day would move gently without unnecessary demands. That assumption, repeated across millions of homes, shaped the feeling of the morning. Outside, neighborhoods stirred slightly. A door opened and closed, footsteps crossed a porch. Somewhere a car started, then idled quietly before pulling away. Movement returned, but carefully. Christmas Eve felt distant now, though it had ended only hours earlier. Its quiet lingered, like warmth held in walls and floors long after the heater turned off. History continued in its most subtle form. The nation did not pause officially, yet it behaved as if it had permission to slow. Conversations were unhurried, decisions were postponed. Even thoughts took their time forming. Children noticed the difference without understanding it. Adults understood without discussing it. Both moved through the morning with the same gentle expectation. Nothing urgent was required right now. Hope on this day was not a promise of change. It was the comfort of continuity. The hours passed, light grew brighter, the world remained manageable. And so the calm extended, carried forward from the quiet of Christmas Eve into the steady simplicity of the day that followed, leaving behind no dramatic moment, only the reassurance that rest had been allowed, and that was enough. As the morning settled fully into itself, nothing in particular demanded attention. The light outside became clearer, but it was not sharp. It rested gently on rooftops, on quiet streets, on the sides of parked cars that had not moved since the night before. Shadows softened, edges blurred slightly. Everything appeared exactly as expected. Inside homes, people moved slowly from one room to another. Some wrapped themselves in sweaters, some left blankets draped over chairs, knowing they might return to them later. The temperature felt steady enough. There was no need to adjust much. Christmas Day, shaped by the calm of Christmas Eve, carried no urgency in its early hours. It allowed pauses between actions. It allowed silence between words. In many American households, conversations were brief and unimportant. Simple observations, mild comments about the weather, a quiet agreement that the coffee was warm enough. No one felt compelled to say anything meaningful. Meaning could wait. Hope continued in this quiet form. It appeared in the absence of worry, in the lack of pressure, in the understanding that nothing had to be resolved today. History, when viewed closely, is full of mornings like this. Mornings that follow nights of rest, mornings that do not announce themselves, they do not become stories, they simply exist and then pass. Outside, the world functioned at a reduced volume. Stores opened later or not at all. Roads carried light traffic. Public spaces felt larger because fewer people occupied them. Even sound seemed to travel farther, stretched thin by the quiet. Time felt different. Minutes passed, but they did not stack up impatiently. They drifted. For those who reflected, thoughts came gently. The year behind them was acknowledged without analysis. The year ahead was noted without planning. This was not the moment for goals. This was the moment for breathing. Hope did not push forward. It stayed where it was. As midday approached, the morning's calm did not disappear. It simply changed shape. Light shifted again, people moved a little more, but the softness remained, carried forward from the night before. Christmas Eve had done something subtle and lasting. It had reminded people, quietly, without instruction, that rest was allowed and that waiting could be peaceful. And so the day continued, steady and unremarkable, built on a night that asked for nothing and offered just enough comfort to carry everyone gently forward. The afternoon arrived without ceremony. It did not announce itself as a new chapter. It simply followed the morning, as afternoons always do, extending the same gentle pace. Light shifted across rooms, moving slowly along walls and floors. Curtains were adjusted slightly, then left alone. In many homes, people settled into comfortable stillness again. Some sat near windows, some rested on couches, some returned briefly to sleep, not because they were tired, but because there was no reason not to. The day allowed it. Outside, the air remained calm. A few more cars appeared on the roads, but traffic stayed light. Movement was careful, unhurried. There was nowhere urgent to be. Christmas Day carried forward the quiet promise made the night before. Today does not demand much. Hope, steady and unobtrusive, continued to exist in the background. It did not shake plans. It did not require optimism. It simply remained present, like a low, steady sound that fades into familiarity. In American history, this kind of day rarely receives attention. It does not change policies. It does not alter outcomes. It offers something quieter, continuity. People prepared simple meals. Leftovers were accepted without complaint. Plates were filled and refilled without discussion. No one rushed to clear the table. Time stretched comfortably around ordinary actions. Conversations, when they happened, stayed close to the surface. Memories were mentioned casually, stories repeated from years before, already familiar. Repetition did not reduce their value, it increased it. Outside, the afternoon light softened again as it began to fade. Winter days did not linger. They eased into evening naturally, without resistance. The quiet returned, familiar now. Christmas Eve felt distant, yet its influence remained. The calm it introduced had not disappeared. It had simply spread across the day, thinning slightly but staying present. Hope remained unchanged. It did not grow. It did not shrink. It stayed exactly where it was, enough to make the day feel manageable, enough to let the hours pass without strain. As evening approached once more, the country prepared, unconsciously, to settle again. Lights would turn on, curtains would close, the day would finish without drama. And in that steady ending, the same quiet reassurance returned. Nothing urgent had been required, and everything essential had quietly continued. Evening arrived in the same way the rest of the day had, slowly and without instruction. Lights came on in homes one by one, not all at once. Lamps glowed softly in corners. Kitchen lights reflected faintly off countertops. The outside world dimmed again, and the indoors felt warmer by contrast. Christmas Day began to release its hold. There was no clear moment when it shifted from afternoon to evening. The transition happened quietly, almost unnoticed. People adjusted their routines slightly. Some prepared simple dinners. Some reheated food without concern for presentation. Some ate earlier than usual. Others waited longer. There was no correct timing. Hope, still present, did not change shape. It remained calm, familiar, reliable. Outside, the streets were quiet again. Decorations glowed more clearly now that darkness had returned. They did not compete for attention. They simply filled the space they had been given. In many homes, people returned to the same rooms they had occupied the night before. Chairs were pulled closer together. Blankets were folded, then unfolded again. The temperature felt just right, or close enough. Conversation slowed as the evening deepened, words became less necessary, silence returned, comfortable and unremarkable. History moved forward without marking this moment. It did not pause to note how calm the country felt or how evenly the day had passed. It simply continued as it always had, supported by millions of ordinary evenings like this one. Christmas Eve now felt far enough away to be remembered only vaguely, yet its quiet influence remained, shaping the way the evening settled. Hope stayed, not as a thought, but as an atmosphere. And as night began to take over once more, the country prepared, unconsciously, for another quiet stretch of hours, resting again in the simple understanding that nothing needed immediate attention, and that was enough. Night returned without effort. It did not feel new, it felt familiar, as though it had been waiting patiently all day. Darkness filled the spaces outside windows, softening outlines and quieting the last movements of the evening. Inside homes, routines repeated themselves. Dishes were rinsed or left until later, chairs were pushed in slightly, doors were checked once, then trusted. These small actions carried no emotion beyond habit, and that was comforting. Christmas Day continued to fade, leaving behind no urgency to remember it in detail. It had passed gently, and gentle things rarely insist on being recalled. Hope remained steady, unchanged by the passing hours. Televisions were turned on and off, radios played quietly in the background. Some sounds blended together and then disappeared. Silence returned easily, without resistance. Across the United States, the night looked much like the one before. Street lights cast familiar pools of light, sidewalks remained empty, the air cooled gradually, evenly. People prepared for sleep again. Pajamas were folded or laid out, lights were turned off carefully, one room at a time. No one hurried, there was nowhere else to be. History continued its quiet work, another day was completed without incident, another night began without announcement. Christmas Eve had passed and Christmas Day had followed it, and now both settled into memory without demand. Hope, having never raised its voice, did not need to lower it. It simply stayed. And the night went on, calm and unremarkable, carrying everyone gently forward once again. The hours deepened, stretching quietly toward the early morning. The nation slept. In cities, the occasional car passed, its headlights cutting briefly through the dark, only to vanish again. In small towns, even that rare movement was absent. The world seemed paused, but it was only moving slowly, deliberately, like a clock whose hands had learned to breathe. Inside homes, the warmth of heaters and stoves offered a gentle reassurance. Floors creaked occasionally under restless sleepers. Blankets were adjusted, pillows fluffed or pressed against cheeks. Nothing mattered beyond comfort. Even the smallest motions felt significant only because they were familiar. Christmas Eve and Day were behind, yet their quiet influence lingered. The soft rhythm of ordinary life persisted, unnoticed but steady. Routines repeated unconsciously, a window left slightly ajar, a kettle ready to boil in the morning, shoes placed just so by the door. These small continuities reminded people, without words, that the world was still functioning as it always had. Hope, invisible and unassuming, continued to rest alongside them. It did not require acknowledgement or excitement. It simply existed, embedded in the small constancies of life. The soft hum of a furnace, the gentle ticking of a clock, the predictable dimming of lights at bedtime. As midnight gave way to the pre-dawn hours, even the air outside seemed quieter. Wind moved slowly through trees. Snow, if present, rested untroubled on lawns and sidewalks. Even clouds appeared to linger, thick and still, without rush. In history books, such nights rarely receive attention. They are uneventful, they leave no famous names or decisive events behind. But in reality, these nights carried their own quiet importance, a sense of peace and continuity that allowed people to endure, to rest, and to imagine that tomorrow could arrive safely, without catastrophe. And so the night pressed on, vast and calm, carrying the world gently forward. Hope, resting quietly, waited with everyone until the slow, steady approach of a new day. The darkness slowly loosened its grip. It did not retreat suddenly, it eased back almost politely as the night reached its quiet conclusion. The sky lightened in barely noticeable shades, moving from deep black to a softer gray. No one announced this change. It happened whether anyone was watching or not. Across the United States, the earliest hours of morning arrived in silence. Streets were still empty. Porches were untouched. Decorations remained exactly where they had been left, glowing faintly or resting unlit, waiting without expectation. Inside homes, sleep continued. Dreams faded gently, leaving no sharp edges behind. Bodies rested in familiar positions. Breathing stayed slow and even. Nothing disturbed the calm. Hope remained present, but now it blended completely into routine. It was no longer a feeling, it was a condition. The simple knowledge that morning would arrive and that life would continue in its ordinary way. Eventually, someone stirred, not because an alarm sounded, but because rest had finished doing its work. Eyes opened briefly, then closed again. A thought appeared, then drifted away. Morning waited patiently. When the day finally began in earnest, it did so quietly. Coffee makers hummed, lights clicked on softly, windows were uncovered just enough to let in pale light. The world did not demand celebration or reflection, it only offered another day. Christmas had passed. The calendar moved forward as it always did. The quiet of Christmas Eve and the calm of Christmas Day settled into memory without insisting on importance. They had done what they were meant to do, provide rest, continuity, and a gentle pause. History continued supported by nights like these. Hope, having never raised its voice, stayed exactly where it belonged, woven into the ordinary, dependable rhythm of everyday life. The morning settled in, steady and unremarkable. Light filled rooms more fully now, revealing the familiar arrangement of furniture, the same pictures on the walls, the same small marks and details that had been there before the holidays arrived. Nothing had changed overnight, and that felt reassuring. People moved through their homes at a measured pace. Some opened refrigerators and closed them again without much thought. Some stood near windows for a moment, observing the quiet outside. Others sat down and remained there, simply enjoying the absence of urgency. Outside, neighborhoods remained calm. Trash bins waited by curbs, mailboxes stood empty. The roads, though beginning to wake, did so slowly. The holidays' influence lingered just enough to keep everything from feeling rushed. Hope continued in its quiet form. It did not appear as excitement or ambition, it appeared as acceptance, the understanding that the day would unfold as it needed to, without force. There was comfort in that. In the long story of American life, mornings like this were common. They followed weekends, holidays, and ordinary nights alike. They carried forward routines without demanding attention. Coffee cooled slightly in mugs, a newspaper lay unopened, a phone rested untouched on a table. None of these moments required action. Christmas Eve and Christmas Day now belonged to the past, gently folded into memory. They did not need to be revisited or explained. Their calm had already done its work. History continued, supported by these quiet transitions. Not every moment needed to be significant. Not every day needed a purpose beyond existing. And so the morning moved forward, calm and steady, carrying with it the lingering softness of a night that had offered rest and a holiday that had asked for nothing in return. The hours continued to pass, one after another, without any need for attention. Late morning blended gently into midday. The light outside grew brighter, but it did not feel sharp or demanding. It rested easily on sidewalks, on quiet streets, on houses that had stood through many winters just like this one. Inside, people found themselves doing small, familiar tasks, a cup rinsed and placed upside down to dry, a blanket folded neatly and set aside, shoes returned to their place by the door. None of these actions felt urgent. They were simply the next thing to do. Hope stayed present in this ordinariness. It lived in the knowledge that routine still worked, that systems still held together, that life continued without requiring constant attention. This quiet reliability was its own kind of reassurance. Across the country, offices remained closed or prepared to reopen later. Schools stayed quiet. Parks sat mostly empty, waiting for another day. The pause lingered, thinning slowly but not disappearing all at once. History rarely marks these in-between days. They sit quietly between celebrations and responsibilities, between reflection and motion, yet they carry people forward just the same. Time felt flexible. Minutes stretched or compressed depending on attention. There was no schedule insisting on precision. Outside, a few more people appeared. Someone walked a dog at an unhurried pace. Someone else checked a mailbox, finding little or nothing. Cars passed occasionally, but not enough to disturb the calm. Christmas felt complete now. It had arrived, passed, and settled into memory without disruption. Its quiet influence remained, shaping the way people approached the rest of the day. Hope, unchanged and steady, remained woven into the ordinary rhythm of life. And the day continued, gentle and unremarkable, moving forward without resistance, just as it always had. The afternoon returned again, familiar and undemanding. It arrived without distinction, settling gently over the day. Light shifted once more, stretching shadows slightly longer, then drawing them back again. The sky held its place, pale and steady, offering nothing dramatic. Inside homes, the quiet persisted. Some people sat in the same place they had earlier, comfortable enough not to move. Others wandered briefly from room to room, then stopped, unsure what they had intended to do and deciding it did not matter. Hope remained steady in the background. It was no longer something felt, it was something assumed. Across the United States, this kind of afternoon repeated itself countless times throughout history. The day after a holiday, the space between excitement and return, the moment where nothing was required except to exist comfortably for a few more hours. Outside, the world continued its low-volume activity. A neighbor stepped out briefly, then returned inside. A delivery truck passed without stopping. Leaves or snow shifted slightly with the air. Everything behaved as expected. Time moved forward, but it did not rush. It allowed the afternoon to stretch until it was finished being itself. In kitchens, light snacks replaced meals. Water glasses were refilled. Cups were left where they were set down. The small disorder of daily life returned gently, without resistance. Christmas Eve now felt distant, almost abstract. Christmas Day had settled behind it. Both belonged to the past, remembered not for specific events, but for the way they had slowed everything down. History continued quietly, supported by days like this, days that did not change anything, yet made change bearable by offering rest in between. As the afternoon drifted toward evening once more, the same calm understanding returned. Nothing urgent was waiting, nothing needed fixing right now, nothing was expected beyond moving gently into the next hour. And so the day carried on, unremarkable and complete, holding the quiet reassurance that life, steady and familiar, was continuing exactly as it should. Evening approached again, slow and predictable. The light outside softened, losing its brightness without any sense of hurry. Shadows grew longer across familiar rooms. Lamps were switched on one at a time, casting warm circles that felt contained and safe. The transition from day to night happened gently, without interruption. Inside homes, people adjusted without thinking much about it. A sweater pulled closer, a chair moved slightly, a blanket lifted and settled again. These motions had been repeated countless times before, and they required no thought now. Hope remained exactly where it had been all day. It did not grow louder as night returned. It did not fade. It stayed quiet and dependable, like something that had always been there and did not need to be checked on. Outside, streets returned to their evening stillness. The number of passing cars thinned again. Sounds softened. The world appeared to exhale once more. History moved forward in this ordinary way, supported not by moments of excitement, but by repetition, by evenings that arrived calmly and nights that followed without incident. In kitchens, simple dinners were finished or skipped entirely. Plates rested in sinks, counters remained mostly clear. Nothing felt unfinished enough to matter. Conversation slowed, then paused. Silence returned naturally, without discomfort. It filled rooms gently, like familiar background noise. Christmas was now fully behind everyone, not forgotten, but complete. It no longer shaped the moment directly. What remained was the calm it had left behind, a softness that carried forward into the routine of everyday life. As night settled in again, people prepared for rest once more. Lights dimmed, doors were checked. The house grew quieter, room by room. Hope stayed. It stayed in the knowledge that tomorrow would come. It stayed in the comfort of familiar surroundings. It stayed in the steady rhythm of ordinary nights like this one. And the evening passed into night, calmly and without demand, continuing the long, quiet story of rest that Christmas Eve had begun. The night settled fully into place. It felt complete, balanced and undisturbed. Outside, darkness rested evenly across neighborhoods, parking lots, and empty streets. Inside, homes returned to their familiar nighttime state, quiet, dim, and steady. People moved toward sleep without thinking much about it. Teeth were brushed slowly. Lights were turned off carefully. Someone paused briefly in a doorway, then continued on, unsure why they had stopped and deciding it did not matter. Hope remained present, but invisible. It no longer needed the holiday to justify itself. It existed independently now, woven into routine, carried quietly by habit and repetition. Across the country, the same sequence unfolded again and again. Bedroom doors closed or stayed open. Hallway lights clicked off. Heating systems adjusted themselves automatically. These systems worked quietly, reliably, asking nothing in return. History continued in this unremarkable way. No one recorded these moments. No one documented the exact second when sleep arrived. Yet these were the moments that sustained everything else, the pauses between effort, the stillness between days. As sleep deepened, thoughts loosened their grip, worries softened, plans drifted out of focus. The mind rested where it could, unchallenged. Outside, the air cooled slightly. Wind moved gently, then stopped. The night made no statement. It simply existed. Christmas Eve now belonged entirely to memory. Christmas Day had joined it. Both were complete, settled, and quiet. They had passed without urgency, leaving behind nothing dramatic, only rest. Hope remained unchanged. It did not insist on progress. It did not require belief. It did not demand improvement. It stayed simply because life was still moving forward, quietly and steadily, one unremarkable night at a time. And the night went on, uninterrupted, undemanding, calm, carrying everyone gently toward another ordinary morning, just as it always had. The hours continued their slow passage. Time did not feel measured anymore. It felt wide and patient, stretching gently in every direction. Clocks still moved, of course, but no one listened closely enough to notice each minute passing. Sleep held steady across the country. In bedrooms, breathing remained slow and even. Blankets rose and fell. The quiet was not empty, it was full of rest. Outside, the world stayed still. Streetlights hummed softly. Empty roads reflected a faint glow. Trees stood without movement, their branches relaxed, as if nothing was expected of them tonight. Hope stayed exactly where it had been. It did not shift with the hour. It did not depend on dreams or thoughts. It existed quietly in the background, like the steady presence of night itself. In the long stretch between midnight and morning, there was nothing to decide and nowhere to go. This was the least demanding part of the day, the portion of time that belonged to no one and everyone at once. History passed through these hours unnoticed. Generations before had slept through nights just like this one. Generations after would do the same. The sameness was not dull, it was reassuring. It meant that things were continuing as they always had. Somewhere a clock clicked softly as it turned over another hour. Somewhere else a heater turned on briefly, then off again. These sounds came and went without disturbing the calm. Christmas no longer lingered in thought. Its presence had dissolved fully into routine. What remained was balance, the sense that nothing had been disrupted, that the world had returned gently to itself. Hope rested comfortably in that balance. As the night moved closer to morning, the darkness remained unbroken. Dawn waited patiently, not yet ready to appear. There was no rush. And so the quiet continued, uninterrupted and complete, holding the country in a long, gentle pause, one that asked for nothing, promised nothing, and gave exactly what was needed. The pause lingered. Nothing pushed the night forward except time itself, and even that seemed content to move slowly. The darkness stayed consistent, neither deepening nor lifting too quickly. It simply remained, calm and familiar. In homes across the United States, sleep continued its quiet work. Bodies rested without instruction, minds drifted without effort. Dreams came and went, leaving no clear trace behind. This forgetting was gentle, and it was welcome. Outside, the world remained unchanged. A porch light stayed on because it had been left on. A window glowed faintly from a nightlight inside. Somewhere far away, a distant sound faded before it could become meaningful. Hope stayed present, not as anticipation, but as steadiness. It lived in the certainty that nothing needed attention right now, that the systems people depended on were still running, that the night was doing exactly what it was meant to do. In the quiet hours before dawn, the country existed in a rare balance. No expectations, no announcements, no transitions yet, just continuation. History, when it looks back, will not pause here. It will move past this night without comment. Yet nights like this one made everything else possible. They gave space for recovery. They allowed motion to slow without stopping completely. Gradually, though still almost imperceptibly, the darkness began to thin. Not enough to notice at first, just enough to suggest that morning was somewhere nearby waiting. Inside, someone shifted slightly in their sleep. A blanket slipped, then settled again. The room remained quiet. Hope did not change as dawn approached. It did not become brighter or more ambitious. It remained calm, grounded, patient. And the night, having done its quiet work, continued to hold on just a little longer, steady, undemanding, and complete, before gently giving way to another ordinary day. The change came so gradually it was almost theoretical. The night did not end so much as it softened. Darkness thinned at the edges, retreating without resistance. The sky shifted through subtle shades that most people never noticed because they were still asleep. Nothing announced the transition. It simply happened. In quiet neighborhoods, the earliest signs of morning appeared without sound. A faint light along the horizon, a slightly different color to the air, the world adjusting itself gently, as it always did. Inside homes, sleep loosened its hold little by little. Not abruptly, not all at once, just enough for breathing to change, for dreams to fade more quickly, for awareness to hover nearby without fully arriving. Hope remained steady. It did not become expectation, it did not turn into planning, it stayed exactly as it had been, present, modest, and unassuming. The calm of Christmas Eve, now several days behind, had fully dissolved into routine. Yet something of it lingered still, carried forward in the slowness of this morning, in the absence of urgency, in the way the day seemed willing to wait. Eventually, someone opened their eyes and did not close them again. They lay still for a moment, listening. The house was quiet. The world felt manageable. Outside, a bird made a brief sound, then stopped. Somewhere else, another answered. These were not announcements, they were acknowledgments. The day did not rush in to replace the night. It entered carefully, respecting the quiet that remained. Light filled rooms gradually, revealing nothing new, only what had always been there. Christmas was now fully part of the past. The decorations remained, but the feeling had settled. What was left was something simpler and more enduring, the steady continuation of ordinary days. Hope lived comfortably here. It did not need celebration or explanation. It did not require belief or effort. It existed because life was still moving forward, calmly and reliably. And so the morning continued to arrive, slowly and without demand, carrying everyone gently out of the night and into another unremarkable day, one that would pass quietly, just like all the others, and in doing so give rest its final, silent completion. The morning settled fully, but it did not hurry anyone along. Light rested in rooms without insisting on activity. It revealed the same walls, the same furniture, the same quiet arrangements that had existed before the night began. Nothing needed adjustment. Nothing required attention. People remained still for a while after waking. They listened to the quiet. They noticed the temperature of the room. They acknowledged the day without engaging with it yet. This pause felt natural, as though the morning itself understood the value of waiting. Outside, the world continued to wake slowly. A distant engine started, then stopped. Somewhere, a door opened and closed again. These sounds did not interrupt the calm. They blended into it. Hope stayed present in this stillness. It did not ask the day to be better than yesterday. It did not expect improvement or progress. It simply accepted that the day had arrived, and that arrival alone was enough. In kitchens, someone eventually filled a glass with water. Another person stood near a window, looking out without searching for anything in particular. These small moments passed without being marked. The quiet left behind from Christmas Eve had fully merged with ordinary life now. It was no longer distinct. It had become part of the background rhythm, undistinguishable from all the other gentle pauses that carried people from one day to the next. History continued forward, unbothered by the lack of drama. It had always relied on mornings like this, mornings that did not announce themselves, mornings that asked nothing beyond presence. As the hours moved ahead, the day remained manageable. Nothing pressed in too closely, nothing demanded immediate resolution. Hope stayed exactly where it had been all along. Not loud, not inspiring, not urgent, just steady. And the day went on, calm and unremarkable, supported by the quiet assurance that life, in its simplest form, was continuing as it always had, slowly, gently, and without needing to explain itself.